Let me ask you a real question. When you post online, are you actually expressing yourself or are you performing a version of yourself that you think people will applaud? Because lately I've been noticing something, and it's not just with influencers and content creators, I'm noticing it from everyday people. Social media doesn't feel like people sharing their lives anymore. It feels like everybody is on a stage, performing and peacocking. So today we are challenging this thought. At what point did we stop being authentic and start being an aesthetic? You've reached the Secret Society's Unfiltered AF hotline.
At the tone, please record your message.
Hey, Size, you already know who it is. It's your girl, Secret Frison, back with another episode of Unfiltered AF. The sacred circle where we heal out loud and in color is now open. So, I want to dig into a topic that could very well affect everyone on social media, whether they realize it or not. Family, are we building our platforms and communities from authenticity or the pressures to impress society? Because those two things might look similar from the outside, but they come from two completely different places. When I began creating this space, and every time I sit down and write or produce an episode, I ask myself these same questions first because it's very easy to fall into the trap of creating something that looks good instead of creating something that's actually real. And the reason I ask myself those questions is because social media can be a very strange place. At first, it feels like a place where you can just show up and be yourself, but the longer you're in it, the more pressure you start to feel. Pressure to look a certain way, pressure to present your life a certain way, pressure to make everything look polished, curated, and aesthetic. And slowly, sometimes without even realizing it, we start creating this version of ourselves that we think people will like more. And that's not necessarily the version that's most real, but it is the version that gets the most approval. And listen, I'm not saying that there's anything with wanting your content to look good. There's not anything wrong with wanting to have a specific presentation, and there's nothing wrong with having an aesthetic either. But there is a problem when the aesthetic becomes more important than the authenticity. Because at that point, you're not really sharing your life anymore. You are performing a curated version of it. And after a while, something subtle shifts. The goal stops being connection and starts becoming validation. And I think that's where a lot of people end up trapped without even realizing it. I think the tricky part about validation is it feels good at first. The likes feel good, the comments feel good, the reshares feel good, and every notification lighting up your phone gives you that moment of, okay, people see me. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying appreciation for something you created, but when validation becomes the goal instead of connection, that's where the line starts to blur. Because now you're not asking yourself, is this real to me? You're asking yourself, will people like this? And those are two completely different questions. And the more we start chasing those reactions from people, the easier it becomes to slowly shape ourselves into whatever gets the most applause and not what's most honest, not what's most authentic, just what performs the best. And we all know social media rewards performance, which doesn't always support authenticity. It rewards the things that look perfect. It rewards the things that look aspirational, polished, desirable, and aesthetically pleasing. And now we're in an era where AI can generate captions, images, even entire personalities online, which makes authenticity even more valuable than ever because one thing technology still struggles to replace is human connection. I think it's safe to say that we all know life isn't always polished and it isn't always curated. And the truth is, most people's lives don't look like the highlight reels that we scroll past every day. So, over time, people start adjusting. A little tweak here, a little edit there, a little exaggeration here, and a little silence about the messy parts there until eventually the version of you that people know online starts becoming very different from the person that you actually are offline. And that's where the trap really begins because now you've built an audience around a version of you that might not even feel fully honest anymore. And once people start expecting that version of you, it becomes harder and harder to show up as your real self because now you're maintaining an image. Now you're maintaining a brand and you're maintaining performance. And that can be exhausting because performing requires energy, performing requires consistency, and performing requires you to constantly think about how something will be perceived instead of simply expressing what's true. But authenticity works differently. Authenticity isn't always neat. Authenticity isn't always perfectly packaged. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's vulnerable, sometimes it's messy and incomplete. But authenticity has something that performance will never have that is connection, community. And when someone is authentic, you can feel it, you can sense it. There is a different kind of energy there. It doesn't feel forced, it doesn't feel rehearsed, it feels human. And human connection will always last longer than manufactured perfection. Because people might follow an aesthetic for a moment, but they stay for the authenticity, they stay for the honesty. They stay for the moments where they see themselves reflected in someone else's story. And that's the difference between building a platform and building a performance. One is rooted in truth, the other is rooted in approval. And approval is temporary because the same audience that applauds you today can easily scroll past you tomorrow if they feel like the performance stops entertaining them. But when people connect with you for who you actually are, you don't have to constantly reinvent yourself to keep their attention. You just have to keep showing up as yourself. And that is the most peaceful way to exist both online and in real life. So maybe the real question isn't just are people performing online? Maybe the real question is are we brave enough to show up authentically even when it doesn't perform its best? Because authenticity doesn't always go viral, but it does build trust, and trust builds real communities. And if you're building something meaningful, to me, that's far more valuable than simply building something impressive. So I want to bring the question back to you. Think about this during the week and the next time you post something. Ask yourself, what is the real intention behind it? Are you sharing it because it feels true to you? Or are you sharing it because you think it will be received well? Are you expressing your thoughts or are you editing them so they sound more acceptable? And if social media disappeared tomorrow, would you still feel comfortable with the version of yourself that you have been presenting to the world? Because at the end of the day, your platform should feel like an extension of who you are and not a costume that you put on. And the goal shouldn't be to impress everyone. The goal is to resonate with the people who recognize your authenticity the moment they see it. And those are the connections that actually last. So, Syrens and Syres, are you building something real or are you building something that simply looks good? Because those two paths may look the same at first, but over time they lead to very different places. And maybe that's the real challenge I want us all to sit with after this conversation. Not just questioning what we see online, but questioning ourselves too. Are we showing up honestly? Are we sharing what's real? Or are we slowly shaping ourselves into something that looks good on screen, but doesn't necessarily feel true in our spirits? Because authenticity requires courage. It requires you to be okay with not always fitting the trend. It requires you to be okay with not always getting the most applause. And it requires you to trust that the right people will recognize your voice when you use it honestly. And that is the kind of community we are building here. Not a highlight reel, not a performance, a space where we can grow, question ourselves, and heal out loud and in color. So, if this conversation made you pause for a moment, if it made you reflect for even a little bit, do me a favor, like this episode, leave me a comment, and tell me your thoughts. I would genuinely love to hear your perspective on this topic. Share this episode with a friend who might still be in their cocoon, still figuring out who they are outside everyone else's expectations. And if you're new here and you've been rocking with this conversation, go ahead and subscribe so you can stay connected to the sacred circle because these conversations are only getting deeper from here. Syrens and Syres, thank you for sitting in this sacred circle with me today. Until next time, as always, be you, be unshakable, and be unfiltered AF.